In the Falcone world, a woman was assessed the way any other asset was assessed. Her bloodline, her fertility, what she could produce before 40, made her irrelevant. Maeve Dunbar had walked into Luca Falcone's house carrying a secret that should have reduced her to zero by those calculations. She hadn't planned on telling him. She had planned on doing her job, surviving her brother's mistake, and getting out with her skin intact. But the truth had a way of surfacing, and when she finally said the words she had been swallowing for 8 years, Falcone answered in a way she hadn't once prepared for. One sentence. That was all it took to undo every wall she had ever built. The records room was on the 2nd floor of the Falcone compound, tucked behind a door that looked like a closet from the outside. Nobody came in here except her. That suited Maeve fine. The room smelled the way old money always smelled. Paper dust, rubber cement, and the ghost of cigarette smoke soaked into the ceiling tiles over decades. The filing cabinets were institutional green, dented at the corners, labeled in a cramped handwriting that had belonged to somebody named R. Albano, who had been Falcone's father's bookkeeper, and who, judging from the single-framed photograph by the window, had been a man who never once smiled. Maeve respected that. She had been here 6 weeks. Her name was Maeve Dunbar, 28 years old. Forensic accounting degree from Loyola, New Orleans, a brother named Kyle who had the self-preservation instincts of a drunk raccoon, and no particular illusions about how she had ended up in this room. Kyle had spent 14 months skimming from the payroll processing system that ran through one of Falcone's legitimate shipping companies on the waterfront. Not a lot at first. Just enough to cover his losses. Then more. Then enough to buy himself things he didn't deserve, and tell himself he'd earned them. Falcone's people caught him on a Tuesday in November, during a routine internal audit. They didn't break anything. They laid out exactly what he had taken, what it had cost with interest, and gave him a choice. Work it off, over years doing things Kyle had no interest in doing, or bring in his sister. Kyle had called her immediately. She'd told him exactly what she thought of him for 45 straight minutes. Then she packed a bag and drove from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. Her job was to reconstruct 5 years of financial records, misfilled, partially destroyed in a flood, and in some cases deliberately obscured by people with reasons to keep things murky. Falcone needed clean books, not for anyone external. For himself, to find exactly where money had been leaking from his organization for a decade, and who had been doing the leaking. She was good at it. That was the only thing keeping her sane. "You haven't taken lunch." The voice came from the doorway. Maeve didn't look up from the ledger. She was cross-referencing 2 sets of figures, construction company invoice logs against an internal payroll file, and she was close to something. She could feel it the way she always felt it, a kind of gravity pulling her toward a number that didn't belong. "I'm not hungry," she said. "It's 2:30. I can tell time." She heard him step into the room. Luca Falcone was 42 years old, built like something forged rather than born. Broad shoulders, a jaw hard enough to etch glass, dark hair gone silver at the temples. He had a scar running under his left ear and disappearing into his collar, and his hands. When she allowed herself to notice them, were the hands of a man who had done things that required hands. But what she had noticed most, the first time she actually looked at him instead of looking away, was how tired he seemed. Not the tired of a man who needed sleep. The tired of a man who had been carrying the same weight too long and couldn't remember how to set it down. "There are sandwiches downstairs," he said. "Not an order, just a temperature reading." "Thank you." She still didn't look up. He moved closer and stopped at the edge of her table, looking at what she was working on without touching anything. He'd learned fast that she didn't like her system disturbed. "Anything," he said. "Something's wrong in the Meridian invoices." She tapped the page with her pen. "The materials charges for the Conti Street job in 2019 don't match the supply receipts. About $14,000 got invoiced and approved but never actually ordered." She looked up. His expression hadn't changed. That particular blankness he wore as a default, not empty, just locked. Somebody on the inside was approving dummy invoices. How long have you known? 2 hours. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, more like the recognition one careful person extends to another. He nodded once and left. That was how most of their interactions went. Minimal, precise, no wasted motion on either side. The thing she hadn't expected was the quiet. She had prepared herself for something uglier. She had heard enough about what Falcone was and what he maintained to arrive expecting fear, and she had been afraid at first. But he ran his house the way he seemed to run everything else, with cold efficiency and without unnecessary theater. He didn't threaten her. He didn't speak to her as though she were furniture. He left food outside the records room on days she forgot to eat, and he answered her questions about the files with the flat brevity of a man who found drama wasteful. 6 weeks in, she had started to forget to be afraid. That was its own kind of danger. On a Thursday evening in early February, Falcone appeared in the doorway again past 7 o'clock. She was packing up for the night. Kyle's debt was cleared 10 days ago, he said. Maeve's hands went still on the stack of folders. I put him on a bus to Baton Rouge. There's a freight company there that'll take him on legitimate work. He paused. You're free to go. She turned around slowly. 10 days ago, she repeated. I should have told you sooner, not an apology, just an acknowledgement, which was somehow both less and more. Her throat felt strange. Then why am I still here? Because you haven't asked to leave, he held her gaze, and because my Uncle Caruso is coming to dinner Saturday. He's going to tell me I need to marry the Giuliani girl. He's been building toward it for 6 months. He paused. I want you at the table. I'm your bookkeeper, the girl you kept in the records room. You're the woman who found my money in 4 hours when Albano couldn't find it in 4 years. He uncrossed his arms. And you don't scare easily. I need someone at that table who doesn't scare easily. She looked at her ink-stained hands. What time is dinner? She asked. The Caruso estate in Metairie sat behind iron gates chosen for announcement rather than protection. The dining room was long enough to host a small congress. Bruno Caruso sat at the head, 68 years old, with the look of a man who had spent decades being agreed with. His wife Francesca sat beside him, rigid and jeweled and quietly assessing everything. 2 of Falcone's capos, Di Pietro and Lenz, occupied chairs further down. Caruso's eyes went straight to Maeve when they walked in. And this is the accountant, he said. Not a question. Her name is Maeve, Falcone said. He pulled out her chair. He didn't look at his uncle when he said it. He just waited until she was seated before taking his own place beside her. Francesca made a dry clicking sound with her tongue. You brought your bookkeeper to a family dinner. How charitable of you, Luca. Just like your father, always collecting strays. The implication landed exactly where it was aimed. Maeve kept her hands flat on the tablecloth and her face neutral. She recognized the technique. Cruelty delivered as social observation, with just enough plausible deniability to make objection seem thin-skinned. The Giuliani girl is 22, Caruso said, pouring wine. Her father controls the Port Authority contracts from here through Biloxi. The family has been looking for a Falcone connection for 2 years. He leveled his glass toward Falcone. You're 42 years old, Luca. The organization needs an anchor. A man without succession is just a placeholder. I'm not marrying Isabella Giuliani, Falcone said. Flat, certain, the way he'd say a number. Caruso's face went dark. You think this is your decision alone? The organization runs because I run it. Falcone didn't raise his voice. You were my father's consigliere, Bruno, not mine. The silence at the table had weight. Francesca's gaze moved to Maeve, slow and deliberate, the look of a woman cataloguing damage. She'll give you nothing, she said, as though Maeve were an object under discussion. No name, no alliance, no future. Whatever she is to you tonight, you'll spend the rest of your life apologizing for it. Falcone stood up. Get your coat, he said to Maeve. She got her coat. In the car going back, she watched the rain blur the lights of Metairie against the window, and tried to name the thing sitting in her chest. It wasn't gratitude. It was something more complicated, like a door she had assumed was sealed beginning to open, which was terrifying, because she knew what lived on the other side of it. The truth she had been carrying for 8 years, the one she had promised herself she would never open for someone she might actually want to keep. Back at the compound, Falcone went to his study. Maeve followed him. The room was dark except for a dying fire. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon without asking. Handed her one. She took it this time. "You don't have to do this," she said. He looked at her over his glass. "Do what?" "Fight them for me." She set the glass on the edge of his desk. "Caruso isn't wrong about what I am. I'm a girl from Gentili with a state school degree and a brother who steals from the people who employ him. I'm not what your world requires. My world requires someone who can look at 5 years of manipulated accounts and find the leak in 4 hours," he said. "My world requires someone who sat at that table tonight with Francesca Caruso, trying to dismantle her with every sentence, and didn't move. That's not what Caruso means, and you know it." Falcone set down his glass. He walked toward her, and she held her ground, which cost more than she would have admitted. "Tell me what you think I need," he said. "An heir, a strategic alliance, a woman whose family adds something to yours." She kept her voice level. "In your world, a wife isn't just a partner. She's a guarantee." "I don't want a guarantee." "You'll want one when you're 50. When you look around and there's no one." She stopped. He was watching her the way he watched a column of figures when something didn't add up. Waiting. "When you look around and what?" he said. It wasn't really a question. The fire shifted. Rain tapped at the high windows. Maeve looked at her own hands, dry, ink-stained, practical, and made the decision she had been not making since the night she understood she wasn't afraid of him anymore. "I can't give you children," she said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced being steady about this for 8 years. "I carry the gene for Huntington's disease. I've known since I was 20. There's a 50% chance any child I have inherits it." She looked up at him directly. "I made a decision a long time ago that I would never put that coin flip onto a person who had no say in the matter. I will never have children, Falcone, not biologically. I made my peace with that. But you need to hear it now, before any of this goes further than it already has." She stopped. She waited for the calculation behind his eyes to reach the obvious conclusion. The fire burned low. The rain came harder against the glass. He was quiet for long enough that the silence became its own kind of pressure. She felt her grip on her composure begin, very slightly, to cost her something. Then his hand moved, firm, warm, and certain as it cupped her jaw. His thumb found the corner of her eye, where something had escaped that she hadn't meant to let escape. He tilted her chin up until she was looking at it. His eyes in the firelight were not cold. "Do you think," he said slowly, "that I want to put a child in this house, in this world?" He let a beat go by. "I have spent my entire adult life managing what my father built. And what my father built is a machine that takes everything it touches and makes it useful until it wears out." His thumb moved again, just slightly. "I don't want to hand that to a child. I never did. I just never had a reason to say so out loud." Maeve stared at him. "You should be careful," she said, "about what you're telling me." "I'm always careful," he said. "That's how I've stayed alive this long." He released her jaw. But he didn't step back. "I don't want a dynasty, Maeve. I want someone who sees the same things I see when I look at this life and doesn't pretend they aren't there. I want to come back to this house and find you in it." She thought about 8 years of carrying a truth that always reduced her to a loss on someone else's balance sheet. She thought about every person who had quietly recalculated what she was worth once they heard it. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. He leaned down and kissed her, careful, deliberate, entirely unlike a man who was uncertain about anything. 3 days later, the Giuliani family sent its answer. His name was Marco Giuliani, 26 years old, newly installed as his father's representative in New Orleans. He arrived with 2 men built like loading equipment and the kind of confidence that mistakes entitlement for competence, he bypassed the west gate. Falcone's fixer Pietro, a precise and unflappable man who had been with the family for 20 years, appeared in the records room doorway with a bruise forming under his left eye. Mr. Giuliani insisted on waiting inside, Pietro said in the tone of a man reporting a fire without raising his voice about it. Maeve walked into the front parlor. Marco was at Falcone's bar, helping himself from a crystal decanter, assessing the room with the look of a man calculating what it would be worth once it was his. He turned when she walked in. "The bookkeeper," he said. "I've been hearing about you." "You're welcome to wait for Falcone in the driveway," she said. "He'll be back within the hour." Marco set his glass down. "I didn't come to wait." He walked toward her. "My sister has been waiting on a ring for 4 months. My father controls 11 judges and the union contract for every port from here to Pensacola. You think Falcone can run a waterfront operation without that?" He tilted his head. "From what Caruso tells us, the reason he's throwing it all away is standing right in front of me." "The reason," she said, "is that Falcone makes his own decisions." Falcone is making a very expensive mistake. His eyes were flat and certain. A woman who can't even give him what he actually needs. He said it the way you'd point out a defect in a contract. "Do him a favor, pack your bag and go back to wherever you came from." He reached past her toward the stack of ledgers she had brought down from the records room, months of reconstructed financials, cross-referenced in her own handwriting. She said, "Don't." He picked up the top folder and deliberately let it drop. Papers scattered across the floor. The heat that moved through her chest was not fear. She turned to Falcone's desk, opened the left-hand drawer, and took out the letter opener she had noticed 3 weeks ago because it was the right weight and the wrong size for paper. She set the tip of it against the mahogany surface with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Marco's hand went still. "Pick them up," she said, looking directly at him. He laughed, disbelieving. "You're serious?" "I work with numbers." She kept her eyes level on his. "Numbers don't have feelings. They don't exaggerate. They tell you exactly what is and what isn't." She didn't move the letter opener. "What is? You are in a room where you don't have the advantage, holding papers you shouldn't have touched, with backup that has already been outmaneuvered. What isn't? A version of this conversation that ends well for you." The door opened. Falcone came through it the way cold air comes through a window left open by mistake. Silently, immediately, in a way that changed the atmosphere of the room entirely. He didn't look at Maeve, he looked at the papers on the floor, then at the bruise still forming on Pietro's jaw, then at Marco Giuliani, and the look was so devoid of anything recognizably human that Marco actually took a step back. "You put a hand on my man," Falcone said, quiet, factual. "We came to have a conversation. You came to intimidate a woman in my house, and you touched my files." Falcone walked forward. Marco's men reached into their jackets. DiPietro and Lenz, who had come in behind Falcone without Maeve noticing, had them covered before the hands cleared the lapels. Falcone stopped 2 feet from Marco and looked at him the way you look at an error you are preparing to correct. "Tell your father the Giuliani alliance is finished. The waterfront contracts your family holds come up for renewal in 8 months. I own the zoning board that has to approve the terminal expansion your father needs to make those contracts viable." He paused. "Tell him his son came into my house and put his hands on my work." A longer pause. "Leave." Marco Giuliani left. Afterward, when it was just the 2 of them and the scattered papers and the rain starting up again outside, Falcone crouched down and began picking up the files. Methodically. In order. She crouched down beside him and did the same. "Caruso told them," she said without looking up, "about the gene, about the children. They're going to use it. Every family he talks to is going to hear it. You'll be the Falcone who chose a woman who gave him nothing." "Then they'll be wrong," he said. "It will cost you." Everything costs something. He picked up the last folder and straightened up. He looked at her, and the exhaustion in his face was still there, but underneath it was something she hadn't seen before. something that looked, improbably, like relief. What Caruso is actually afraid of, he said, is that I'm not doing this to spite him. He's afraid I mean it. Do you? He held her gaze for a long moment. Help me find what's in those ledgers, he said. Whatever Caruso has been hiding from my father for 20 years. I know it's there. I've suspected it for 3 years, and I didn't have anyone I trusted with numbers enough to look. He didn't look away from her. Help me finish this. She thought about the Meridian invoices, about the number that didn't belong. Let me go upstairs, she said. They worked 4 days. The compound locked down quietly around them. No visitors, minimal staff, DiPietro and Lenz on the perimeter. Maeve ate at her work table and slept in short windows, and moved through the records the way she moved through all of them, systematically, without sentiment, following the logic of the numbers wherever it led. It was in a 2009 ledger, tucked inside a false back panel she found, because the binding was too thick for the number of pages it contained. A secondary set of accounts, cash flows running parallel to the official books for over a decade, payments coded to supply vendors that had never supplied anything. A name repeated in cramped initials at the bottom of every page. BC. Bruno Caruso. She called Falcone in from the hallway without raising her voice. He came. He looked at the figures without speaking for a long time. He wasn't stealing from you, she said. He was using you, using your infrastructure to run his own transactions off the books, which means he has been exposing you to liability you didn't know existed for 11 years. She looked up, while telling you that you owed him loyalty. Falcone stared at the page. The look that settled over his face was not anger. It was the specific expression of a man who has suspected something ugly for a long time and has just been handed the proof and is now calculating, completely and without hurry, what to do with it. Pietro, he said toward the door. Sir Pietro appeared immediately. Secure courier to Chicago tonight. This goes to the Galvano family. The old man directly. He looked at Maeve. The Galvanos have been wondering for 6 years why their percentages from the New Orleans distribution never matched the reported receipts. Now they'll have their answer. He straightened. And contact the attorneys. Begin separating my name from every entity these accounts touched. Sir, that process will take. As long as it takes, Falcone said. Caruso moved fast. She had to give him that. The perimeter alarm went off at 2 in the morning, splitting the dark of the compound like a blade. She heard the alarm, then Falcone's footsteps in the hallway, then the hard, clean snap of a weapon's action being checked, and she understood what was happening before anyone said a word. She went to the reinforced storage room on the ground floor, the place Falcone had shown her on her second day, which she had dismissed at the time as excessive and now understood was not, and she locked the door and sat with her back against the steel shelving in the dark. She counted seconds. She ran arithmetic in her head, long meaningless columns of numbers, because it was the only thing that kept her hands from shaking in the way that did not help anyone. 40 minutes later, she heard his voice on the other side of the door. Maeve. She opened it. He was damp from the rain, a cut above his left eyebrow still seeping, his shirt dark at the shoulder. He looked at her the way you look at something you thought you might have lost, and have just confirmed you haven't. It's over, he said. Caruso. Alive. DiPietro has him. He paused. He's going to Miami on a charter plane in the morning with a passport and enough cash to disappear. If he comes back, the Galvanos will handle him. If he contacts the other families, the attorneys release everything. She nodded, processing. You're bleeding, she said. He touched the cut as though he'd forgotten it. I know. She found the first aid kit in the supply room and he sat down on the bottom step of the stairwell without being asked, which told her more about how tired he actually was than anything he would have said. She cleaned the cut without speaking. He let her. When she was done, she stood back. What happens now? She asked. He looked up from the step. The cut was small. The exhaustion went deep. Now I dismantle the rest of it. he said. The shell companies. The union arrangements. The contracts that can't survive daylight. He said it with the same flat precision he used for everything, but she heard what was underneath it. I have enough clean money to live 4 lifetimes and never touch anything grey again. He looked at her. What I don't have is a reason to rush it. I've been doing this long enough to know it doesn't stop because you decide you're done. It stops because you actually build something in its place. She looked at him on the bottom step of his own stairwell, cut and wet and, for the first time since she had met him, not performing a single thing. I'm not going anywhere, she said. It wasn't a large thing to say. She meant it completely. 6 months later, the records room had been converted. The institutional green filing cabinets were gone. The dented shelves, the boxes of misfilled paper, the smell of rubber cement and old secrets. All of it had been cleared out over 2 weekends in March, carried downstairs by Pietro, who had exchanged his usual black suit for jeans and seemed to find the whole process quietly satisfying. In its place, her office, her desk against the east window where the light was good in the mornings, bookshelves sorted by her own system, a second-hand couch from an estate sale in the garden district that was the color of old mustard and deeply, stubbornly comfortable, which she had chosen over Falcone's politely horrified objection that it matched nothing else in the house. It's my office, she had said. He had, without further comment, helped her carry it upstairs. The compound itself was quieter. Di Pietro and Lenz had taken positions with a legitimate security firm. Falcone had capitalized for them as part of the separation. The perimeter guard had been reduced to a single overnight shift run by a retired cop named Whitfield, who read paperback westerns and waved at the mail carrier. The armored cars were gone. 2 ordinary vehicles sat in the driveway. Pietro remained. He had announced, in his usual measured tone, that he had no interest in retiring and would continue managing the household until further notice. Maeve had told him she was very glad. He had nodded once, as though this settled a business matter, and returned to whatever he'd been doing. The attorneys were still working. There were months left in the disentanglement, accounts to properly surface. A charitable foundation being funded with liquidated assets from 3 shell companies, run by a board that had no particular reason to know who had funded it or why. Falcone spent a lot of time on the phone, but he came home by 7 most nights. On a Saturday morning in August, Maeve was at her desk reviewing draft statements for the foundation when she heard his footsteps on the stairs. Even unhurried, the cadence she had learned to read the way she read columns of figures. He leaned in the doorway of the room that used to hold secrets and looked at the ugly couch and the books and the east-facing window, and something in his face settled in the way it had been learning to settle, slowly, over months. The Galvano attorneys confirmed this morning, he said. Caruso's accounts have been fully unwound. Whatever was in our system that shouldn't have been is gone. She put her pen down. Clean? Clean. He crossed the room and sat down on the ugly couch with the ease of a man who had made his peace with it. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at her. I had a call this week from a law school friend who runs a white-collar defense practice in Houston. He's looking for a forensic accountant for a long-term consulting engagement. He asked if I knew anyone. She looked at him carefully. Are you asking if I want to go back to work? I'm asking what you want. He said it simply, without agenda. It was one of the things she had come to understand about him, that when he asked a question, he was actually asking it. Houston, or here, or somewhere else entirely. There's a property in Vermont Pietro found, if you want trees and no neighbors for 3 miles. He looked at her across the room. I have learned, in the past 6 months, that I have very few opinions I'm willing to fight for. You're one of them. Where you work isn't. Maeve looked at her desk, at the foundation statements, at the August light coming through the east window in long, slow bars. She thought about what Francesca Caruso had said at that dinner table. She'll give you nothing. She thought about every balance sheet she had ever looked at, and how a number that looks like a deficit from one angle can register as an asset from another. depending entirely on what you're measuring. She thought about the gene she carried, the coin she had decided 8 years ago she would never flip for someone else. She had spent a long time believing that decision made her a closed account, a dead end, a woman who subtracted from whatever she entered. She turned back to Falcone. "Stay here," she said. "I like the light." He didn't smile, exactly, but the hard lines around his mouth softened in the way she had learned to read as the closest thing to it. "Okay," he said. She went back to her foundation statements. He picked up the book Pietro had left on the arm of the couch and opened it, and the room was quiet in the way that two people who have stopped performing anything make a room quiet. Not empty, not dead, but full in the way that actually lasts. The Falcone name would end with him. No heir, no dynasty, no chain running forward into a future that would charge the same price the past had charged for generations. She had spent 8 years being told that made her a loss, that she failed the only calculation that mattered in rooms like the one she had sat in across from Francesca Caruso. Francesca had been wrong. Or rather, she had been right about the math and completely wrong about whether the math was the point. Maeve wasn't a dead end. She was the end of a line that had needed ending. And there was a difference, if you knew how to read figures. If you understood that a balance that clears to zero is not the same as a balance that never existed. In the office that used to hold secrets, in the August light, with the foundation statements spread across her desk, and Falcone reading on a couch the color of old mustard, Maeve Dunbar felt something she had not felt in 8 years of carrying a truth she thought would always make her less. She felt like exactly enough.